everybody, I'm Chris from Full Steam Designs. On today's episode, we're going to be building this charcuterie board. Charcuterie board. Charcuterie?
Hey, I'm Chris from Full Steam Designs. On today's episode, we're going to be building this charcuterie board.
Alright, so we're going to start this project out by just making a mold. And what this is going to do is help to contain the wood that we're going to use and the epoxy, and just keep it from going all over the place. I'm using 3/4 inch, some is plywood and some is MDF, but it's all coated with melamine. And it just gives a nice smooth surface to fill the epoxy with. I'm just going to pre-drill and countersink some holes and just use screws to hold this together. One really important thing that I'm going to be doing is using Tyvek tape. It's also known as either sheathing or seam tape, and you can get it in your ventilation section of like your local home store. And what this is going to do is just help the epoxy not stick to the mold. I've done this before and not used this and had a major problem because of it. So this is a very important step. Make sure you're not skipping this. So I'm just screwing the sides on, and then I'm just going to put a little bit more tape on just to be safe. Alright, I've got another piece of this spalted pecan. I built a mirror out of this, and I'm just cutting it down on my chop saw and then using my Wen track saw just to cut it in half. And I'm just cleaning the bark off. Not being too particular about this. In this scene here, I'm just cutting it down to size. And I'm kind of just sneaking up on the fit. That's why I'm making so many cuts, just to make it fit nice and tight. Clamp it down just to keep them flat and keep them from floating away when I start pouring the epoxy. Alright, I'm just mixing a little bit of the epoxy in this little cup. I find it best to use the smallest cup possible and make sure you spill as much of it as you can on your router table. The trolls really seem to like that. And I'm just using a little bit of black spray paint. It's just acrylic enamel spray paint to stain it. And what I'm doing here is just brushing on a real light coat, and this is just going to help seal the wood before I really start pouring the big amounts of epoxy and trying to fill it. If you don't do this, I've found that you get a lot of air bubbles. So this, just like the Tyvek tape, is also a very important step. So I'm using Glaze Coat by Eclectic Products, and they're not a sponsor or anything, but they did send me this, and I wanted to just try some out and see what we can do with it. They recommend not filling anything over 1/4 inch, so what I'm doing is making 2 pours at a time, and each of those adds up to about 1/4 inch, and then I'll come back and pop the bubbles. And this is just to keep it from overheating. Now you're going to notice on this last one I'm using a bigger container, and what I did was I used a paint mixer to mix this, and you can also notice that it looks a little hazy. I used a little bit less black paint in there to tint it, but also that paint mixer I think really aerated it, and I think that's what caused this problem here, because it really started steaming and getting hot. So I just think introducing all that air into it was not the right thing to do, so I would recommend mixing it by hand. I didn't have any problems when I did it that way. And what I was doing is just, pouring my 1/4 inch layers, waiting a couple hours till it started to get tacky, and then coming back, pouring another layer, waiting, pouring another layer, and waiting. And now this is 24 hours later. It's all cured. I've popped it out of the mold, and it came out very easily because of that tape. And now I've just got it sitting in my CNC router, and I'm just surfacing it down. I'm using a 1-inch white side surfacing bit here. Usually use this to surface my wasteboard, but it also works great on stuff like this. So I did the top side, and then I just flipped it over, and now I'm doing the bottom. I'm taking off about 1 millimeter at a time on each pass. And now I'm just cutting it down to the final dimensions that I want it to be. And I'm just kind of quickly sanding it, not trying to make it look nice or anything, but just getting it a little smoother than it was. Alright, now we're going to jump into Adobe Illustrator, and I'm just going to make the hexagon pattern with this. And what I'm doing is just drawing one of the hexagons and moving them around until they're all aligned properly so that they're all touching. I've used just a 0.1 pixel stroke on each line just to keep it very thin. And what we're going to be doing is just making a complete vector with this. This is how I ended up arranging them after I deleted everything. And then when we import it into Carbide Create, they're all going to be closed vectors, and you can select each individual piece, move it around if you'd like. This is actually the final design that I came up with here. And then when we cut it, we're just going to select a no offset toolpath. And just ignore the little bits that are missing there. It just doesn't render properly, but it will come through and cut everything right. So I've got it sitting back in the router, and I have my 1/8 inch bit in here. Like I said, we're just doing a no offset toolpath, and I've got this set to cut 0.3 inches deep. Cut through it pretty good. You can see it kind of left some of the epoxy in there, and I just came back later and scraped it out with a screwdriver and vacuumed it up, and it came right out. Alright, now I've got more epoxy mixed up. We're using the same stuff, and I've just added some powdered green pearl pigment this time. It's very important to get the ratio right on this. It's 50-50, so just use equal amounts of each half. And it's also very important to mix them the proper amount of time. They recommend 5 minutes, and I definitely would recommend doing it every bit of 5 minutes. It seems like a really long time, especially when you're doing a lot of stuff like this, but that's very important. Come back with the torch just to pop some bubbles. Let it sit overnight, and now here we are again the next day, coming back in the CNC router just to surface it down. A lot of ways to do this, but with the tools I have, this kind of just made the most sense. Seemed like it was the best choice for me. Wanted to round the edges. I just used this paint can to give me a nice round corner. And now I'm just cutting it out on the bandsaw. I cut right outside the line, and then I have an oscillating spindle sander. I just came back through and sanded everything smooth after I had it cut out like this. Alright, now we're using this 60-degree chamfer bit. I just wanted something just to kind of make it look different. I'm taking a pretty good cut on the bottom. You'll see in a minute when I flip it over. Alright, and then I'm just going to lower it down a little bit, and I'm just taking a slight cut on the top, just again to add a little more character to it. And now I've just got a piece of wood here wrapped in some sandpaper, just sanding everything down. And now we're going to start with our various grades of sandpaper, just sanding the whole thing. I'm starting at 120 grit, next I'll go to 220, 400, 600, 800, and then finally 1000 grit. And after we're all done sanding, I'm just going to install some little foot pads. I just kind of eyeball those and pre-drill the holes and then screw them on. Now I'm going to come back with Odie's oil. This stuff is food safe. It's really a great product. I love using it on stuff. It gives everything a very natural look. I don't really like the overly glossy epoxy tables and stuff like that, so this just kind of makes stuff look more natural. And after putting it on and letting it sit for a few hours, I come back with a buffer and just buff it out. You can really see the depth in that top layer of black. It's really got a really cool look to it. I'm really happy with how this thing came out. Alright, I really appreciate you guys watching. I definitely appreciate a thumbs up and a like. And don't forget to hit that notification bell so you can see when my new videos come out. You guys have really done a lot for me, helping me grow the channel and everything. And I'm going to try to start giving stuff back. I just launched my website. It's fullsteamdesigns.com, and I'm going to have a little makers section in there that's going to have some files and stuff. And the first file I'm putting up is going to be this file that we used today. So make sure you check that out.